The Vietnam War was changing. American combat troops had been withdrawing from a total of nearly 600,000 troops in 1968 to around 158,000 by 1972. Many more would continue to be pulled out. The Republic of Vietnam would have to defend its borders alone. However, this was not the only part of the war that was changing. The Democratic Republic of Vietnam had recently lost its president, Ho Chi Minh, in 1969. Even then, his position had largely been symbolic for years. Instead, it was the General Secretary of the party, Lê Duẩn, who controlled the direction of the country. As General Secretary, he held the exact same position that Joseph Stalin had in the Soviet Union. And as General Secretary, he was the one who gave approval for the planning and launch of the 1968 Tet Offensive. In 1971, Lê Duẩn would push for another all-out offensive to destroy the Vietnamese Republic. With the South Vietnamese military undergoing Vietnamization, it would only become stronger over time. However, with the failure of Lam Son 719, it was clear that it was still figuring out how to fight on its own. The Americans were also not quite out yet. If this offensive went well, the North Vietnamese could claim that they defeated American soldiers in the field, a major political victory. Lê Duẩn convinced the rest of the Politburo to launch this offensive in the following year. For this new offensive, the People's Army of Vietnam transformed itself into a conventional, combined arms force. The Communist world equipped the North Vietnamese with T54-55 Type 59 Main Battle Tanks, 122 and 130mm state-of-the-art howitzers, AT-3 Sagger guided anti-tank, and SA-7 Strela guided anti-aircraft missiles. To support these new systems, 2,000 new trucks and 10,000 tons of oil and gasoline were delivered as well. The communist world stood behind the North. By the end of 1971, 20 battalions of tanks and heavy equipment, the 320A Infantry Division, and other independent regiments and battalions were sent south. The Nguyen Hue Offensive was set to be launched in early spring 1972. On the other side of the DMZ, the Republic of Vietnam was slowly assuming its responsibility for conducting the war. Between 1969 and 1972, the Republic of Vietnam armed forces aggressively expanded from 825,000 to over 1 million men. American military assistance sent over 1 million M16s, 40,000 radios, 20,000 trucks, many different types of aircraft, combat vehicles, and artillery. After encountering PT-76s at Ben Het in 1969, then both PT-76s and T-54s in Lam Son 719 in 1971, the decision was made to transfer ARVN its first main battle tanks, the M41A3 Patton. However, they would only be ready in time for I Corps. II Corps would only have M41 Walker Bulldog light tanks for the Easter offensive, as a light tank at 23 tons, as well as being cheaper than the M48. Up until now, American leadership believed they were more suitable for their South Vietnamese allies. While vulnerable to RPGs and recoilless rifles, the Walker Bulldogs provided the flexibility needed to counter communist infantry strikes and support the Cambodian and Lao incursions. However, these assumptions would soon be outdated. The Bulldogs would be put to the test against Communist bloc heavy armor. By January 1972, in II Corps, Allied leadership was aware that an attack was coming. To prepare, the 22nd Division was redeployed closer to the front to face the impending North Vietnamese assault. However, after more than a decade of fighting insurgencies, South Vietnamese forces were used to deploying its armor in small groups, which provided better security over a larger area. The M41s were divided between Tân Cảnh, Dắk Tô 2, and Ben Het. Ben Het base would hold most of the M41s, since it was thought that would be where the main North Vietnamese strike would come from. Unfortunately, deploying in small groups like this was the opposite of what was needed in armored warfare. Even then, Allied leadership doubted that heavy armor would be deployed in the high altitudes of II Corps. Then, On March 30th, 1972, the Nguyen Hue Offensive was launched by the People's Army of Vietnam. 3 divisions, spearheaded by tanks, charged into the northernmost province of Quảng Trị and smashed into the 3rd Division and Marines. 3 days later, North Vietnamese forces struck Tây Ninh province in 3 corps. Saigon's attention was completely focused on the deteriorating situation in I and 3 Corps. At dawn on April 3rd, the offensive was launched in 2 corps. The 320th PAVN Division launched full, regiment-sized assaults on the fire support bases of Rocket Ridge. The airborne managed to hold on for nearly 3 weeks, but after the situation deteriorated badly in I and 3 Corps, they were ordered out of 2 Corps. By April 23rd, Rocket Ridge was fully withdrawn. The 320th PAVN Division took the fire bases, leaving the 22nd Division completely isolated at Tân Cảnh and Dắk Tô II. The same day, the 2nd PAVN Division finished its preparations to launch its own attack against Tân Cảnh and Dắk Tô. At 9 a.m., the first state-of-the-art Soviet weapon was deployed onto the battlefield, the AT-3 Sagger wire-guided anti-tank missile. At Tân Cảnh, while just passing the entrance of the base, an M41 suddenly burst into flames. It was 500 meters from PAVN positions, completely out of range of RPGs. While Allied leadership was trying to figure out what happened, a missile shot past them and destroyed another M41. Then, a large wave of Saggers destroyed many of the bunkers one by one, including the command bunkers. Nobody knew how to counter them. By the end of the day, all 5 M41s present in the compound were destroyed. The 22nd Infantry Division also lost all communication and was unable to coordinate. Tân Cảnh was now primed for attack. That evening, at 9 p.m., the Dắk Tô District Local Forces spotted tanks and called in a Spectre. It spotted 18 tanks west of the town, then started to engage them. Later, the 9th Airborne at Dắk Tô II also reported hearing tanks and headlights and called in another Spectre. This Spectre spotted 3 more, for a total of 21 T-54s. Both Spectres only had high explosive rounds, so only lucky shots could pierce the armor. Only 3 tanks were estimated to be knocked out by the Spectres. Unbothered, the column turned south towards Tân Cảnh at midnight. The 105mm battery in the base fired a single volley, hitting a truck and narrowly missing the tanks. But before they could adjust and refire, heavy PAVN howitzer fire forced the men back into their bunkers. There were no longer any heavy guns that could stop the tanks. The column then crossed 2 bridges, reaching the town. Some turned back towards Dắk Tô. The remainder continued to proceed towards Tân Cảnh combat base. The Spectres now had to cease fire due to the civilian presence. To try to compensate, the 42nd Regiment turned one of its companies into tank hunter teams and sent them out with laws. The teams managed to destroy 2 T-54s, but this was too little, too late. The T-54s were now in position, ready to strike. At 5:10 a.m., the assault on Tân Cảnh was launched. 9 tanks, supported by infantry, smashed into Tân Cảnh south perimeter. The 10 T-54s to the north started to open direct 100mm fire on the base, supporting a 2nd infantry assault. The North Vietnamese soldiers coordinated well with their armor, keeping right behind them. In the face of the armor, 2 infantry regiments and a heavy bombardment of 122 130mm howitzers, the 42nd Regiment completely shattered. The command group of the 22nd AVN Division, which it defended, was destroyed. The commanding officer of the 22nd, Colonel Lê Đức Đạt, was killed. Nearby, at Dắk Tô II, the 47th AVN Regiment and 9th Airborne Battalion did not have any time at all to react to the loss of the 42nd and division leadership. While Tân Cảnh was under full assault, artillery fire intensified on Dắk Tô. 4 tanks of the PAVN 7th Tank Company immediately drove over to Dắk Tô II to support the assault there. 2 T-54s drove right onto the airfield. one to the west to block reinforcements coming from Ben Head. The other rolled onto the center of the runway. It then proceeded to destroy all of the 47th Regiment's bunkers one by one. Two M41s that had survived tried to take the initiative and drove into a flanking position to try to take out the center T-54 from the side. They fired 3 shells each at the T-54, but none of these shots could penetrate the armor. The North Vietnamese T-54 immediately turned around and destroyed the 2 tanks, one after the other. A Cobra gunship also flew in to try to destroy the tanks with its rockets, but they were ineffective. Seeing this in front of them was completely devastating to South Vietnamese morale. It seemed that nothing could faze the T-54s at all. The 12 M41s at Ben Head drove out to try and reinforce Dắk Tô too. However, 1 kilometer down the road, they were ambushed by a North Vietnamese blocking force equipped with recoilless rifles, RPGs, and Saggers. 9 of the tanks were immediately destroyed, and the remaining 3 were forced to retreat back to Ben Head. By now, the 47th Regiment had also shattered. Dắk Tô 2 combat base had fallen as well. North Vietnam's new, combined arms style of war yielded astonishing results. With the 22nd Division destroyed at Tân Cảnh and Dắk Tô 2, the path to the provincial capital, Kon Tum, swung wide open. The first provincial capital of Military Region 2 was vulnerable to capture by the Communists. The 23rd ARVN Division would have to be rushed north in a last-ditch effort to defend the city. The South Vietnamese soldiers and their advisors, after more than a decade of fighting anti-insurgency warfare, were unprepared for peer-to-peer conventional war. The M41s were completely outclassed by T-54s. The helicopters and gunships were not equipped to take on heavy armor. The new Communist artillery outranged all but the 175mm, which were rare. In 3-Corps, guided anti-aircraft Strela missiles easily knocked low-flying aircraft out of the sky. As American forces and assistance was leaving, it was clear the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces was left with the tactics and weapons to fight the last war, but not the current one newly developing. This new war defies the public memory of a war trying to chase down elusive guerrilla forces in the jungle. It defies the memory of the majority of American soldiers, one where they had the monopoly on armor and could easily deploy from helicopters with impunity. In the last years of the war, it was fought between 2 fully conventional forces. It was this final war, one spearheaded by the Communist armored fists, that finally took down the Republic of Vietnam.